Hello and welcome to York Observatory's weekly TeleTube broadcast, the online astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. York YouTube broadcasts every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. local Toronto time. Today we will be playing our Halloween special Herschel's 200th anniversary adventure play held on October 31st, 2022. It comprises of a lecture by Dr. Parandis Tajbakhsh, followed by an amazing violin concert featuring Kate Hazala, Jesse Tamang, and Yusuf Tajbakhsh. Hope you all enjoy. But before we get started, I would like to mention that the observatory at York campus is in Toronto, and we would like to welcome you all to our show and to acknowledge the traditional land that our telescope is on. The observatory acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been taken care by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Our stargazing and astronomical efforts join the long history and current practices of astronomy for this land. The observatory looks forward to continuing to learn and revitalizing our knowledge in this area. I will now go ahead and play our recording of the Herschel event. Hope you all enjoy.
If anyone does sort of come in late or you can be, please use one of the side doors and do not use this door over here. That's where musicians are going to be. So without any further ado, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. This program should be about an hour, and just FYI, after the show at 9 p.m., observatory tours will open to the Haunted Herschel. So have a wonderful Halloween and enjoy.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm just not going to grab how to do this here. This one's here. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Herschel 200th anniversary event. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a program that was born out of joint efforts of the Allan Carswell Observatory, known as the York U Observatory, the School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design, as well as the Faculty of Science, and a number of individuals who kindly volunteered their time and expertise in helping us developing this program. I'm so happy that you're here tonight. Mr. Thomas Georgie, sitting over there. He helped us with choosing the music of Herschel, and of course, Ms. Gretchen Aberger, without whom I didn't even know about Herschel. So thank you very much for your help with the program tonight. So I hope that you enjoy the program. I am going to give a lecture. I'll try to make it short, not to bore you guys. Hopefully I won't be talking too fast because I am notorious for talking too fast. So I'll try to take my time and basically introduce Herschel, his ideas, his transformation from a musician to an astronomer, and his enthusiasm for observing extraterrestrials. Okay? So I'm sure you all saw our poster, which was a work of some of the very creative individuals who volunteer at the observatory. Well, in 1977, two photograph records were launched aboard Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 spacecrafts. The golden records, as they came to be known, contained a curation of images, sounds, and of course 90 minutes of music. The instructions for playing the record is encoded in the language of mathematics, and long believed by many to be the only universal language. In the words of Carl Sagan, the man behind the contrivance of these phonographs, this curation of music is an attempt to describe us, human beings, as feeling creatures, to a potential extraterrestrial civilization that might chance upon this message in a bottle in the ocean of the cosmos. In this collection of music are included 3 pieces by J.S. Bach, featuring the work of our very own virtuoso, the Canadian Glenn Gould, 2 pieces by Beethoven and 1 by Mozart, as well as some music from different corners of the world, from Zaire to Java to Japan and Peru. It is an irony that this collection of music that is curated for the pleasure of extraterrestrial hearing organs lacks the compositions of a man whose stature as an astronomer overshadowed his genius in music. A zealous astronomer who believed in a populous universe and whose biggest ambition was to observe inhabitants of the moon. Tonight, we are here to commemorate Sir William Herschel, listen to his music, and hear about his hypotheses about extraterrestrial life. Well, Herschel's contributions to astronomy and his pioneering work in developing the field of sidereal astronomy are too many. Amongst the most important ones, however, of course, is the discovery of planet Uranus, which is the very first planet that was discovered with a telescope since the ancient times, and of course, the discovery of 2 moons of Uranus. So I've got some images of Uranus, and these images are brand new. So this one is from Voyager 2, and these ones are, of course, more modern by Hubble Space Telescope. And of course, the moons of Uranus, 2 of the moons of Uranus, Oberon and Titania. So this is a picture of Titania taken by Voyager 2 in 1986, the same spacecraft that has the photographs. And of course, here is Oberon. They are not very impressive, but they were discovered with the telescopes, the powerful telescopes that Herschel went on to build. In addition to that, he also discovered Enceladus, one of the moons of Saturn, one of the places that people believe there might be some sort of microbial life hiding there. And of course, many binary stars that are gravitationally bound together. One of them being Polaris, the North Star. People did not know at the time of Herschel that Polaris or the North Star is actually a binary star, but it is a binary star, and you can resolve it to Polaris A and Polaris B. It turns out that Polaris A itself is a binary, but this is something that was discovered after Herschel. So in fact, by his systematic survey of the sky, Herschel discovered hundreds of the so-called double stars, as they called them at the time. And of course, by showing that some of these double stars, in fact, orbit each other, he showed that gravity was a force that is at work not only in our solar system, but in the entire universe. He was the first man to take on the immense task of mapping the Milky Way. So this is an image of the map that Herschel produced of our own Milky Way. And also, he discovered seasonal changes of Mars and the Martian polar caps. Finally, he discovered a new type of light, which we today refer to as infrared light. So the light that we can see is, of course, the so-called visible light. It consists of a certain number of colors, starts from violet, goes all the way to red, in between. Of course, the results of our evolution of this planet, where the star, that is our parent star, the sun, peaks, in fact, in the color green. But of course, he discovered that there are other colors, and in particular, he noticed that there is a color that goes beyond red. We cannot see it, but we can feel it as heat. Today, we call this infrared. And that was one of the greatest of the achievements of Herschel, that he basically came across when he was experimenting with filters that he was using to look at the sun. Of course, I should mention that the recently launched James Webb Space Telescope is primarily observing in infrared, and it is actually looking at the universe in infrared has opened up a whole new vista of the universe. So many discoveries that were not possible without using this type of light. Herschel's stellar achievements in astronomy has in fact overshadowed his achievements in another field, i.e. music, which he was involved with, believe it or not, until the age of 43, when he officially switched career from a successful musician and composer to become court astronomer to King George III. Herschel, the musician, and Herschel, the astronomer, were both characters that were truly ahead of their time. But Herschel was also a man of his time in believing in a populated universe. He subscribed to the principle of plenitude, which implied that an omnipotent and omniscient God has filled the universe with intelligent extraterrestrials, each adapted to their place of habitation and each praising the glory of God from their habitation. But even in holding his belief, this particular belief of extraterrestrials populating everywhere in the universe, again, Herschel stood out because, in fact, he was the first person to attempt to observationally prove the existence of extraterrestrials. So, in fact, he pioneered building telescopes that would provide better and better images of the surface of the moon with the hope that he would observe the so-called lunarians at some point and have some experimental proof for the belief that people were holding during the 17th and 18th century that the entire solar system is in fact populated by intelligent beings. So the lecture tonight intends to shed some light on two aspects of Herschel's life that have remained relatively unknown compared to his glorious years as an astronomer, his career as a musician, and his belief in the existence of extraterrestrials. The latter likely being the motivation behind the strange change of career. So here I have an image of the so-called Force Nebula. The one on the right-hand side is taken in visible light, and of course the one in the left is taken in infrared. And you can see that taking images in infrared, in fact, reveals a lot of details that are not possible to be seen when we look at something through visible light, something that you can see with our own eyes. Now, Frederick Wilhelm Herschel was born in the electorate of Hanover on 15th of November of 1738, the son of a military band of youths. At the time, the crowns of Great Britain and Hanover were united under King George II. Herschel's ancestors were Jewish, but had converted to Lutheranism in the 17th century. In his own words, William was taught to play on the violin as soon as he was able to hold a small one made on purpose for him. In addition, he learned the oboe, the harpsichord, and the organ, and could play all these instruments quite well. Of course, I should add here that contrary to the musicians today, who specialize in a certain type of instrument and spend years refining and honing their skills on a certain instrument, back then the success of a musician very much depended on being able to play multiple instruments rather than playing one instrument very, very well. And Herschel's father, Isaac, gave him music lessons and made sure that young William learned to play multiple instruments. So the young William, the child, basically practiced long hours under the watchful eye of his mother, Anna, while he took lessons from his father. Now, as a child, William learned the value of slow and repetitive practice, and this prepared him for a type of life and career that was not intended for him. In fact, his upbringing unintentionally prepared him to become an astronomer. He was still a teenager when he basically joined the Hanoverian Foot Guards, where his father was part of the band, and he joined there as an apprentice. Herschel had received a relatively good education in the Garrison School, which was a school in particular for the members of the army back then. And of course, he recounted that when at the age of 14, he auditioned and was accepted into the military band. He started earning some money and hired a French tutor for himself. This French tutor, which he was paying for him out of the music money that he was earning, was the first person who introduced young Herschel to philosophy. Now, William and his older brother, Jacob, sought refuge in England in the aftermath of the disastrous defeat of Hanover in the 7 Years' War at the Battle of Hastings. William, being a teenager, was under no oath and thus left the army. And here I have an image of his discharge from the army years later. And in the autumn of 1757, the 19-year-old William arrived in England and was hoping to follow the footsteps of another German musician, George Frederick Handel, who had made a name for himself in England years before. In fact, back then, England offered better prospects for jobbing musicians like Herschel. Later in life, William told his son, John Herschel, who would in his own turn become a very famous astronomer, he told his son, John, that when he arrived in England in November 1757, had not had half a guinea in his pocket. He went directly to a music shop in London and asked to be allowed to copy music. He did such an impressive job copying the opera he was given that he was hired on the spot. Even though he started out as a music copyist, later in 1761, he was employed as the first violinist and soloist of the Newcastle Orchestra, run by famous English composer Charles Addison, and played there for one season. Subsequently, he was offered a job to instruct the 4-member regimental band of Durham Militia, a station in Richmond, Yorkshire. This is where the 23-year-old Herschel started composing, and within a year composed 7 symphonies. As his fame grew, he was offered to manage concerts in Leeds and teach private lessons. Herschel was most prolific during these years. In fact, when he was in Leeds, between the years 1760 and 1764, so within a 4-year period, he composed 24 symphonies, 4 violin concerti, 2 oboe concerti, and very likely his 24 pieces for violin, some of which we're going to hear tonight in this program. During this time, he was not only improving his English, but also learning Italian, French, and Greek. As a jobbing musician, William wants to make living not only by performing, but also by teaching music to the children of upper and middle-class families in England. Success in this not only depended upon his musical skills, but also required him to be well-versed in the art of conversation, an essential element of etiquette of the polite society of 18th century England. One topic of conversation was, of course, philosophy. This need led Herschel on a journey of self-education during the first half of the 1760s. He read books of philosophy by the famous philosopher John Locke, and also by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, you probably have heard of these names, as well as a book on harmonics by a Cambridge professor by the name Robert Smith. On reading this book, he wrote a, quote, "valuable book of Dr. Smith's harmonics came into my hands. I perceived my ignorance and had recourse to other authors for information, by which I was drawn on from one branch of mathematics to another." The extent to which Herschel became obsessed with learning can be seen in an anecdote of his son John later, who recounts that William kept on reading while traveling between pupil houses in Yorkshire on horseback. He was so absorbed in reading that once he found himself standing before the horse with the book in his hand, quote, having been tossed over the horse's head and not realizing. Even though the life of a jobbing musician left Herschel free to pursue other interests, it soon became clear that it did not provide for a secure income for him. Thus, Herschel started auditioning for full-time positions. Herschel was also clever enough to find ways to distinguish himself as a musician by way of showing off his knowledge of natural philosophy and mathematics. Again, another anecdote will depict this. In a correspondence with his brother, his older brother Jacob, William describes an audition as follows, quote, he writes, "I was a candidate for the place of organist, which by the interest of the masters, Baines, and many musical families I attended, I had great hopes to obtain. About this time, I was an inhabitant of Halifax. My leisure time was employed in reading mathematical books, such as the works of Emerson, Lauren Hodgson, Dr. Smith's Harmonics, etc. This happened to be noticed by one of the masters, Baines, who told his brother, Mr. Herschel, to read clock scenes, and by clock scene, Herschel is referring here to time derivatives of mathematical functions. The year 1766 saw the appointment of Herschel as an organist in Halifax. Even though this appointment was short, an amusing anecdote narrated by one of the people who auditioned alongside Herschel for the position provides a glimpse into the genius of Herschel. The story goes that 6 other organists were auditioning for the position, and apparently the player who auditioned right before Herschel showed such mastery of the instrument that another candidate expressed his dismay to Herschel, saying, quote, "What chance you could have after such a performance?" To which Herschel responded, "I don't know, I'm sure fingers would not do." And Herschel meant that literally. When it was Herschel's turn, the poor discouraged candidate witnessed Herschel, quote, "went up to the organ loft, and produced from the organ so uncommon a fullness, such a volume of slow, solemn harmony, that I could by no means account for the effect." End of quote. Only after winning the audition, Herschel revealed his trick of the use of 2 pieces of lead, one of which he had placed on the lowest key of the organ and another on the key an octave higher, producing a drone effect. By manipulating the harmony in this manner, Herschel emulated the effect of 4 hands instead of 2. Despite his improved offer from Halifax, Herschel left his position there to take up a position of organist in the newly built Octagon Chapel in the fashionable resort town of Bath, which was famous for its spa water, in the summer of 1766. The difference here was that the Octagon Chapel was not only a place of worship, but also a center for musical entertainment. At this point, Herschel started living a comfortable life, and according to his own records, it was during this period that he acted upon his inclination towards astronomy and started collecting an instrument or 2 to observe the sky. So here I have some images of the Octagon Chapel. And while I was researching this thought, I realized that now they have a restaurant there, a beautiful fancy restaurant. But the Octagon Chapel is still there. I don't know if they play music or not, but it seems to be a very nice place to be. Anyhow, a few years into his position as the organist and organizers of the concerts in Bath, Herschel traveled back to his native to bring back his younger sister Caroline in 1772. Caroline had contracted typhus at the age of 10, which had severely affected her growth and had led to loss of vision in one eye. So she had no marriage prospects. She had come to play the role of a scullery maid at home, saving, and Herschel and his old one other brother, Alexander, decided that they should save their sister from such a pitiful situation. So, in fact, they did so. They brought Caroline back to Bath to live with them, the 2 brothers, William and Alexander. And she was supposed to manage the affairs of the household, Herschel's household. So Herschel has time to work on music and, of course, astronomy. But she soon came to play a very important role as the assistant to William Herschel. And she went on to become a very famous astronomer on her own. She was the very first woman who was chosen as a professional astronomer and paid himself to do astronomical research. He was an expert in science. So much can be read, of course, and understood about Herschel's growing interest in astronomy by reading the accounts of Caroline and her brother. In particular, she narrates how upon her arrival from Hanover in 1772, quote, "In the evening when the shops were lighted up, we went to see all that was to be seen in that part of London, of which I only remember the optician's shop, for I do not think we stopped at any other." So, just to give you some idea of how shopping was back during King George III's time. And of course, again, by all accounts, I should emphasize that Herschel had a successful career as a composer and musician. So why acting on his inclination towards astronomy more as a hobby suddenly led to such a dramatic change of career? The solution to this mystery perhaps lies in one of the accounts of Caroline. Amongst the equipments and books that William had bought to satisfy his curiosity was a book by popular writer James Ferguson entitled Astronomy Explained upon Sir Isaac Newton's Principles. Now, Ferguson was not an educated man. Ferguson's entire education consisted of 3 months of grammar school in Scotland. But he was a shepherd, actually. He managed to self-educate and write this book, which became widely popular. It was like a popular science book of our time. And the interesting thing is that I was so embarrassed because I looked at the book myself, and it looks like a very good textbook for first-year astronomy. It's a very, very complete and comprehensive book. So Herschel apparently acquired a copy of Ferguson's book in 1773, and according to Caroline, for a few months, her brother took Ferguson's book, quote, to bed with a basin of milk or a glass of water. Despite being quite elementary, in fact, this book shared a common characteristics with 2 other books that Herschel had read earlier in life. One of them was Locke's Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and the other one was Leibniz's The Odyssey. The 3 books were concerned with extraterrestrials, who extraterrestrials are, why they were created, and what their conditions are in the universe. Now, Ferguson's book was simple to read and was seasoned with high pluralism. And by pluralism, I'm just referring to plurality of the worlds, having many, many worlds rather than just one world here on Earth. So Ferguson depicted a universe where, quote, thousands of suns attended by 10,000 times 10,000 worlds, people with myriads of intelligent beings, formed for endless progression in perfection and felicity. Now, this shepherd turned astronomer and popularizer of science had filled his book with teleological arguments. And by teleology, I am here referring to explaining the existence of something with a purpose that it serves. So you look at other planets, say Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, they clearly do not serve us humans any purpose. At least that was the understanding back then. In the 17th and 18th century. So why would God create them? The question that people ask. God doesn't create anything. Why would God create all these planets and leave them alone? So they should be people, okay? They should be serving a purpose. Their purpose is to be the residence of other intelligent beings. And that was the entire argument that basically Ferguson was putting forward in his book. Now, Ferguson apparently, lectured in Bath twice during his lifetime, 1767 and 1774. Both these years, Herschel was living in Bath, and it is very likely that he attended one or both of the lectures. But what is clear is that Herschel was deeply influenced by the image of the universe that Ferguson depicted. The argument, as I said, went that God created planets to be abodes of other intelligent beings. Now, seeing in this light and noticing Herschel's pluralistic inclinations, one can see that he took upon himself to prove the veracity of what he called the fancy of poets. The first step in doing so, in particular, the first step in, of course, discovering the existence of extraterrestrials living on other planets, was to have the right equipment. And this is what Herschel decided to do. Oh, sorry, I should have showed this book. I forgot. Okay. So in September 1773, Herschel purchased the equipment of a mirror maker and learned the basics of polishing mirrors from this man. He planned to see the astronomical objects that were described by Ferguson and Robert Smith's other book called Optics. Well, of course, not all was success. With the aid of his brother, Alexander, and his sister, Caroline, William was determined to master the art of mirror making. Now, this took years of painstaking work because he had come up with, these were not regular mirrors, these were metal mirrors that he used to polish by hand. So he would stand there and polished hours upon hours without doing anything, because if he stopped polishing, he would lose the touch of how much is polished on the mirror. So during this time, poor Caroline apparently had to feed him by hand because he would polish a mirror for hours. And of course, as I said, it was not all beautiful and rosy. He actually, Caroline recounts an incident when the mold of one of these hot metal mirrors broke, and hot alloy, tin and copper, a mixture of tin and copper, which we call speculum, splashed everywhere in the kitchen and damaged the kitchen floor, and it was quite apparently a dangerous incident, as Caroline talks about it. Now, in fact, Herschel proved not to be a keen observer, but also a great telescope maker. So in this house, in this very house that is now the place of the Herschel Museum of Astronomy in Bath, they polished about, I don't know, probably less than 1,000 mirrors, but he sold 400 telescopes to other people. So within a few years, Herschel became the chief telescope maker in Europe, and he was supplementing his income with making telescopes and selling them to people. On March 1st, 1774, the first page of Herschel's observation journal saw light. His observation journals, however, were soon to be filled with many observations of the moon that will eventually lead to Herschel's scientific debut in Royal Society. On the evening of 1779, Herschel was operating one of his newly developed telescopes in the street when a passerby politely asked him if he could look through Herschel's telescope, which of course Herschel allowed. This man was Dr. William Watson, Jr., a member of Bath Philosophical Society, which primarily consisted of natural historians. Back then, they called biologists natural historians. He invited Herschel to attend the society, and here Herschel came across the methods of natural historians. Okay, back then, at the time of Herschel, astronomy consisted of looking at the solar system, looking at the planets and making charts of stars. Now, Herschel learned the methods of collection and classification of biologists, and he started applying these methods to astronomy, and that revolutionized the field of astronomy as those of people in astronomy know today. It was the start of surveying the skies. Now, in basically 1780, Herschel submitted 2 papers of his own to the Royal Society. He had enough material to be able to write to the Royal Society. One of the 2 papers, Astronomical Observations Relating to the Mountains of the Moon, reveals Herschel's enthusiasm for observing the moon. He writes, and I have a quote here from the paper, "It may perhaps be esteemed to be a mere matter of curiosity to search after the height of the lunar mountains. I grant that there are more necessary and more useful objects of inquiry in the science of astronomy. But when we consider that the knowledge of the construction of the moon leads us insensibly to several consequences which might not appear at first, such as the great probability, not to say almost absolute certainty, of her being inhabited, we shall soon agree that these searches are far from trifling." Now, the paper did not immediately make it to the transactions, because the Astronomer Royal was very, very disturbed by such a comment by Herschel. And he wrote to him and asked about this claim of moon being inhabited, and he was in for a surprise. A letter arrived from Herschel requesting Maskelyne not to call him a lunatic, and then he quotes from a document written 18 months before the submission of this paper, where he says, "Who can say that it is not extremely probable, nay, beyond doubt, that there must be inhabitants on the moon of some kind or other? Moreover, it is perhaps not altogether so certain that the moon is out of reach of observation in this respect. I hope and am convinced that sometime or other, very evident signs of life will be discovered on the moon." And to further surprise Maskelyne, he writes, "The earth acts the part of a carriage, a heavenly wagon, to carry about the more delicate moon, to whom it is destined to give a glorious light. For my part, were I to choose between the earth and moon, I should not hesitate to fix upon the moon for my habitation." While Maskelyne was not aware that it is years that, in fact, Herschel is collecting material to prove that the moon is inhabited. In fact, a careful sift through the unpublished material journals of Herschel shows that in the year 1776, he believed that he had enough observational evidence that the moon was inhabited. In one of these journals, he writes, "Something I had never observed before, which I ascribe to the power and distinctness of my instrument, but which may perhaps be an optical fallacy. I believe to perceive something which I immediately took to be glowing substance. I would not call them trees, as from their size they can hardly come under that denomination. But if I do, it must be understood in that extended signification as to make in any size how great soever. My attention was chiefly directed to mere humor, and this I now believe to be forest, the word being also taken in its proper extended significance as consisting of such large glowing substances." So this is a picture of Herschel's journal, which is drawing of what he believed he saw in mere humor as a forest. Okay, and here is what we see from mere humor. So these are in fact the impact craters on the surface of the moon. These are the scars that any planet or moon in the solar system suffers from because they are bombarded by junk left over from the formation of their solar system. But of course, Herschel is no fool. He immediately proceeds by analyzing whether a forest on the moon can be visible from Earth at all or not. And he writes, "Our tallest trees would vanish at that distance. It is not impossible, but that the vegetable creation, and indeed the animal too, may be of a much larger size on the moon than it is here, though perhaps not very likely. And I suppose that the borders of forests to be visible would require trees at least 4, 5, or 6 times the height of forests." Now, in fact, 5 years before the discovery of Uranus, Herschel believed that he had strong observational evidence of not only lunar forests, but also lunar towns, indicating the existence of intelligent civilizations on our satellite. I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time. I have 3 minutes now? 20 minutes? Okay. I know this is a bit of a long quote, but this is a very interesting quote from Herschel. He writes, "As upon the Earth, several alterations have been and are daily made of a size sufficient to be seen by the inhabitants of the moon, such as building towns, cutting canals for navigation, making turnpike roads, etc. May we not expect something of a similar nature on the moon? There is a reason to be assigned for circular buildings on the moon, which is that as the atmosphere there is much rarer than ours and the consequence not so capable of interacting, and by means of clouds shining therein, reflecting the light of the sun, it is natural enough to suppose that the surface will remedy this deficiency. For in that shape of building, one half will have the direct and the other half the reflected light of the sun. Perhaps then on the moon every town is one very large circus. Should this be true, ought we not watch the erection of any new small circus as the Lunarians make the building of a new town on Earth? Our telescopes will do this. By reflecting a little on the subject, I'm almost convinced that those numberless small surfaces we see on the moon are the works of the Lunarians and may be called their towns. Now, if we could discover any new erection which is evident and an exact list of those towns that are already built would be necessary. But this is no easy undertaking to make out and will require the observation of many careful astronomers and the most capital instrument that can be had. However, this is what I would think. So what he has in mind is that he's going to make a catalog of what he believes are already the basically towns on the surface of the moon, and then keep observing the moon to see if any new structures might show up on the surface of the moon to prove that there are the so-called intelligent Lunarians living. Now, of course, Herschel's professional debut as an astronomer happened in 1781 when he discovered the planet Uranus. And that was, of course, because he started observing the skies in a very systematic way to basically make a catalog of all the stars that he could see and chart their stars. This is a replica of the telescope that Herschel used to discover planet Uranus. And of course, when he made that discovery, he did not know that people were looking for a sixth planet. When he made that discovery, people talked to the king and asked him to basically quit some salary for Herschel so he can basically dedicate himself fully to astronomy rather than music and astronomy as a hobby. And of course, he immediately became a member of the Royal Society and he received the prestigious Copley Medal. And of course, he and Caroline now had to move close to the Windsor Castle in a village called Batchet because Herschel was also to entertain the king as court astronomer, not with his music, but with the beautiful telescope that he had. I'm sorry, this is not in place. Anyhow, now Herschel's unpublished notes of his lunar observations are basically at their peak between 1780 and 1781, and he keeps talking about seeing vegetation, regions that are tinged green, and he even talks about metropolis and small cities and so on and so forth. And to a letter to Scottish astronomer Alexander Wilson, he writes, "The attempt of finding traces of animation in the moon has now been 5 or 6 years, one of those I have endeavored to render practicable. And though I have met with no self-evident or clear demonstration of moons being inhabited, yet do I still hope that a good many of my observations will at least render the reasons we may allege from analogy more forcible. However, the many interruptions I have between these last 2 years met with," and he's referring by interruption to the discovery of Uranus, have prevented my observations on this subject to be so frequent as I now, with improved instruments, hope to make them. Very happily, our gracious sovereign has enabled me to follow a study which, from my excess attachment to it, I formerly followed in spite of other employments. And of course, he did what he said. This is Herschel's 40-foot telescope, his masterpiece. The King George III, provided $4,000 for building up the telescope, and he promised that he's going to pay an annual £200. Sorry, I said dollars. I meant £4,000. And he promised to pay £200 a year to take care of the telescope. And of course, it was a disappointment. It was not the best telescope that Herschel made, but of course, for 50 years, this was the biggest telescope that Europe had. Of course, the king famously, when he came to see the final steps of putting the telescope together, he came here with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he said, "Come, my Lord Bishop, I will show you the way to heaven," by pointing to the telescope, which he was very, very proud of. The telescope was dismantled by Herschel's son, John, but after Herschel's death, because he was afraid for the safety of his own family because of such a large structure in the backyard. And of course, John Herschel was one of the pioneers of photography, and he took this picture before he dismantled the telescope. Now, Herschel not only populated the moon, he also believed that Mars is also populated, okay? And he, in fact, as I said, discovered the Martian polar caps and the seasonal variations that is observed in these caps. And he writes that basically that planet, referring to Mars, has a considerable but moderate atmosphere, so that its inhabitants probably enjoy a situation in many respects familiar to ours. Of course, he did not stop at Mars. In the spirit of Giordano Bruno, the famous monk, who populated the entire universe, Herschel also populated the entire solar system. He was thinking about inhabitants of Uranus, moons of Uranus, and of course, one of his strangest ideas, the inhabitants of the sun. And I'm trying to wrap up the talk by telling you about his belief that the sun is also inhabited. Okay, so in December 1794, he published a paper in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, in which he put forward, as I said, his strangest idea, entitled paper, as you can see, is entitled On the Nature and Construction of the Sun and Its Stars. Here, Herschel argued by way of analogy that the sun has an inner structure similar to that of planets. He hypothesized that the sun as a planet, he hypothesized the sun to be a planet with cool, solid, and dark interior, enshrouded within a bi-layered system of clouds. Okay? And of course, the reason for this was that he had observed the sunspots. Okay, so we know today the sunspots are areas in the sun that are cooler compared to the surroundings. But he had observed the sunspots, and he had noticed that the sunspots are in fact impressions on the depressions on the surface of the sun. So he sort of compared this to how clouds are here on Earth. So if you ever see those pictures of Earth taken from space, you see that there are clouds and then there are gaps in the clouds, and you can see the planet from those gaps. He hypothesized that the sun has in fact two layers of, if you want, clouds. These black spots that you can see on the surface of the sun are gaps within the system of clouds where you can peek into the planet, into the sun, if you want, into the interior of the sun, which is cool and dark, and probably in basically the living residence of other intelligent beings. So here's his diagram of the system of clouds. Okay, his original diagram, as you can see on the right-hand side, he's showing the interior to be dark. The bilayer clouds are up there. You can see that there is an opening that he's assuming is the sunspot. The outer layer is hot. The inner layer is reflective, and therefore it actually protects the inhabitants of the sun. So if you write, the sun appears to be nothing else than a very eminent, and I think I have that here, yeah. The sun appears to be nothing else than a very eminent, large, and lucid planet, evidently the first, or in the strictness of speaking, the only primary one of our system. Its similarities to the other globes of the solar system leads us to suppose that it is most probably also inhabited, like the rest of planets, by beings whose organs are adapted to the peculiar circumstances of that vast globe. I think myself authorized, upon astronomical principles, to propose the sun as an inhabited world, and I'm persuaded that the foregoing observations, with the conclusion I have drawn from them, are full sufficient to answer every objection that may be made against it. Of course, he assumed that these strange inhabitants of the sun, whoever they were, they could look at the universe through the peaks, through the basically sunspots, the black dot, if you want, spots that are on the surface of the sun, that are gaps within the system of the cloud. Now you might be laughing at this whole thing and say that, okay, well, Herschel was not in his right mind making up these stories that the sun is inhabited. And of course, he left that impression for a lot of people too. In fact, to see how this affected a lot of people, it is just enough to look at an article that came out in a gentleman's magazine a few years before Herschel put forward this hypothesis about a certain Mr. Elliot, who had fired a pair of pistols too close to the cloak of a lady and thus setting the lady on fire. And of course, the plea for Mr. Elliot by his lawyer was that Mr. Elliot is insane. And as a proof of his insanity, they brought to court a paper that was written by this Mr. Elliot where he hypothesized that the sun is inhabited. So really, yeah, some people saw Herschel fit for bedlam. But he was not disappointed. And I'm going to tell you why, and that's probably my last part of the talk tonight. Herschel was the first person who observed with a telescope the so-called nebulae and could resolve. Now, what are these nebulae? These nebulae are in fact patches in the sky that are fuzzy. So we call them nebulae, the word nebula, clouds. And Herschel back then hypothesized that some of these clouds could be in fact island universes, other galaxies, but they didn't have that thing back then. But he hypothesized that these could be other universes with many, many stars and many, many planets. But he also managed to resolve some of these nebulae which now we call globular clusters, into a dense collection of stars. Okay, so here I have some of the original drawings by Herschel of what he observed in the sky, and here is, of course, a modern image of one of these so-called globular clusters, which was a term that Herschel actually coined. And this is Omega Centauri. It is believed that it has as many as 10 million stars, which are located as close as roughly 1 trillion kilometers to each other. Okay, so the stars are very, very tightly packed. These globular clusters are sort of like satellites. They're the oldest stars in our galaxy, collection of stars in our galaxy. And Herschel managed to observe them and resolve them into stars for the first time rather than a fuzzy patch. So he looks at these and he decides that these guys are too close to each other to allow any planets to go around them. Why would God create such a thing, such an object without any planets? What is the job of these stars? They clearly are of no use to us, right? So he writes, it will hardly be possible to assign any sufficient mutual distance to them to leave room for crowding in those planets, for whose support those stars have been or might be supposed to exist. It would seem, therefore, highly probable that they exist for themselves, and are, in fact, only very capital, primary planets connected together in one great system of mutual support. So he assumes that these stars cannot host planets, so the only reason that they're there is that they are, in fact, residences for other intelligent beings in the universe. And then he says, okay, these stars could be home to intelligent beings, why not our own sun? So in fact, this model, this discovery of the globular clusters and the fact that they're so tightly packed led Herschel to argue that every star, in fact, could be inhabited. Now, Herschel basically died 200 years ago on 25th of August, 1822, at the age of 83, after a long illness. He left behind a huge collection of telescopes, an unbelievable number of contributions to the field of astronomy, and many hypotheses about extraterrestrial life, some of which I discussed tonight. All of these, including his hypothesis about extraterrestrial life, was inherited by his Cambridge-educated son, John, who went on to become, in fact, a great astronomer on his own. In fact, if the name of Bach's became synonymous with music, the name of Herschel's should become synonymous with astronomy, because they actually had 3 or 4 generations of astronomers coming out of the family of Herschel. So, in addition to all the contributions in astronomy, Herschel left us a treasure trove of music, including, of course, 18 symphonies for small orchestra, 6 symphonies for large orchestra, 12 concerti for oboe, violin, and viola, 2 concertos for organ, 6 sonatas for violin, cello, and harpsichord, and 12 solos for violin. I'm sorry. And many other tricks. But tonight, we are lucky actually to have 2 violinists here who are going to play some of Herschel's caprices. So in general, if I'm mistaken, there are musicians in the audience tonight, please correct me. A caprice is written to show the virtuosity of the player, right? It's a piece to show the virtuosity of a player. And of course, they have chosen some of these caprices. They're beautiful. They are well ahead of their time compared to what was basically composed at Herschel's time. And I personally am looking forward to hearing some of these caprices. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I have not bored you.
So this is where the concert portion of this event begins. Since we did not get a direct recording of the musicians, I will first play 3 short clips of our musicians, Kate Hazawa, Jesse Temeng, and Yusuf Tajbakhsh. And now we will play the full concert audio for you.
I'll be playing Herschel's Caprice number 1. I'm going to be playing Caprice number 11 and just.
Okay, so that's it. And Thank you so much, everyone. This is what you have been listening to Allan Carswell Observatory's weekly TeleTube broadcast, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. I hope you all enjoyed this replay of our Herschel's anniversary event. Tonight's TeleTube session was the replay of the October 31st, 2022 York University in-person lecture and concert event celebrating the 200th anniversary of the great musician and astronomer William Herschel. Very big thanks to Dr. Parandis Tajbakhsh for organizing the amazing Herschel event with our observatory that we have replayed for you on tonight's TeleTube. We also need to especially thank tonight's three great musicians, Kay Tozawa, Jesse Tamang, and Yusuf Tajbakhsh. Also, special thanks to Don's office who sponsored this event and School of the Arts Media, Performance Design who provided two of our musicians. All of our programs are free, but if you would like to make a donation, see our website, observatory.info.yorku.ca. Thanks for tuning in. Clear skies and have a good night.